Hi, this is not an anniversary special, but if I go too long without releasing some kind of video, the goblin mask I keep in my antique armchair starts whispering demands that I complained about another TV adaptation. It seems to be appeased for now, ever since I convinced Neil Druckmann to quit his job, so I figured this time I'd take things easy and talk about some underappreciated movies that I actually really like. And also, just maybe, give some writing advice. I haven't actually done that a lot. I thought it would just happen naturally in the process, but turns out I had a lot of repressed feelings about other writers I needed to vent out first. But it's all been circling the same theme, which happens to be staying on theme. We've spent a lot of time in these videos exploring how not to do this. Among a few recent second seasons, we saw some pretty extreme examples of failing to deliver on the themes originally presented because the writers didn't even know what their themes were in the first place, and so they somehow managed to completely contradict them. But watching a bridge collapse doesn't tell you how to properly build a bridge, and what we haven't done yet is explore a few working examples to compare what works versus what works better. I've been recently rewatching some of my old favorites from the past couple decades, and I realized that a handful of them share a common theme, which is that one of the main characters gets cursed and transforms into some kind of hideous monster, like a normal-shaped girl with a pig nose, or a normal-shaped woman, but she's green and has weird ears, or a furry. And I don't know if this reflects my personal tastes, or if the early 2000s just didn't know how to deal with the damage they caused to everyone's self-worth. With so many stories exploring this theme in different ways, it seems like a good way to compare how they achieve it with subtly varying degrees of success. The form it takes in my chosen examples is that somebody is being supernaturally punished for some kind of vanity or selfishness, either their own or someone else's, by having their conventional attractiveness taken away, and then they have to either be accepted by others or accept themselves without it in order to earn it back. I call it By the end of this, I'll give you a few tools that might actually help you finish the story you're stuck on. Techniques that I did not come up with on my own, but that have helped me enough times that they deserve to be passed along as much as possible. I'm still going to bury it inside of a video essay though, because I want to talk about these movies, and this is my outlet. So the most classic example of this theme is probably Beauty and the Beast. It's very direct and to the point. A snobby prince refuses to help an old woman who, surprise, is a witch there to test him, which feels like entrapment, but she curses him and his entire court to look like a hideous beast and some pretty cool furniture, respectively. And in order to turn them all back, he has to get somebody to fall in love with him based on his personality alone, which is bad news for his party guests because he's a vain little punk. Also, I love how across the background of all these stories, there are just these immortal witches who notice someone's being a little shit, and it like bothers them so much that they just dedicate years of their lives to rubbing that person's nose in it until they're too traumatized to ever do it again. It's like their version of clearing an entire afternoon just to rip into some dude on Reddit. Anyway, pretty straightforward. His outside is made to match his gross, unrefined inside and won't change back until he changes who he is as a person. Classic curse stuff. Thankfully, one girl happens to find her way to this guy's castle after he's finally mellowed out, and in the best versions of the story, it's honestly pretty believable relationship development. They imply enough time has passed, and they fall in love with each other, and then they're both rewarded when he turns back into, Yep, he gets his good looks back, she's presumably relieved by her surprise hunk, and the story ends. I've always enjoyed some version of this movie ever since I was a little kid, and yet something about the ending has never felt fully satisfying to me. The best version, and the one I'll be referencing for this video, is unironically the live-action remake from 2017. Obviously, these blatant cash grabs have a terrible reputation that they have 100% earned by doing exactly what we've been complaining about and performatively throwing the themes we're already familiar with straight into the garbage. But listen to me. Beauty and the Beast is fantastic. The pattern I've noticed with Disney is that they tend to stay pretty hands-off when trying out a new idea because they'd rather not invest too much into something that isn't proven to make money. So they leave it to some artists who actually get invested in the art, and they knock it out of the park. And then the second Disney realizes it's a moneymaker, they turn it into a production line and they shoot out as many as they can for as cheap as possible. It's literally what invented direct-to-DVD sequels and why we had Disney Channel shows about the Emperor's New Groove. But those initial prototypes are sometimes really good. You can tell the people who made this one were fully invested in capturing the feeling of the original and translating it to real people, and that's really all it takes to make something worth watching for me. They nailed the casting, and I will fight anyone who wants to argue on that. Emma Watson has the perfect small-town princess vibes for Belle. Gaston feels like he escaped from the cartoon. It's also gorgeous. They translate the animated scenes to physical cinematography so well. Plus, with the choreography and VFX, it's all working together to recreate the experience of that original movie with what I think is way more life and energy. I'm a big CGI nerd, and I can tell you that they really leaned on their strengths for this one. Most of the animated characters are made of materials that are easy to realistically render. Even the Beast himself sells super well, especially compared to later attempts at the same kind of character. His face is incredibly expressive and looks like the actor who's playing him. And it's Disney, so like obviously it's animated expertly and it all just blends with the live action super seamlessly. But the biggest indication that the filmmakers perfectly understood what they were adapting is that they added a new musical number, and it is so good that any future adaptation that leaves it out will feel incomplete. I know she'll never leave me. It improves the pacing, it deepens the Beast character, and it fits right in with the rest of the soundtrack. Like it was missing from the original movie. Future attempts at doing this have been less successful. Remember my song in the swamp when I was like, wah, 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 wah. Despite all the refinements made to this version of the story, though, none of it fixes that one little problem I have with the ending, which is the fact that after growing to love this whole family of characters, the audience kinda has them all ripped away at the end and replaced with people we don't know. I find this interesting because it's not a problem with the narrative, it's just that we like the Beast. We are participating in this story as well, and he's the character we're familiar with, who we learn to love alongside Belle. It's possible this is more subjective than I'm making it out to be, but the intricacies of writing are subtle, so I'm trying to dig in here and find what's really making it tick. And I'm just not personally excited when my Wolfman guy turns into the dude who loses all his modeling gigs to Fabio, even when he's also the Russian guy from Eurovision.
Very crazy sexy time. You love it.
That does help though. I don't want to see him go, so when the story ends and he gets his reward, I'm happy for him, I guess, but I'm not fully sharing in that happiness, and if Belle fell for this version of him, in whatever way, I'm not judging, it seems like she'd likely be feeling a similar mix of emotions when he turns into some guy she doesn't know. And I know I'm not the only one, because when they did make their mandatory low-quality DVD sequels, they set them during the time when everybody is still cursed, because nobody's signing up to watch a movie about Belle and the Prince and all their normal human friends. People want to buy plush toys of the little talking cup, not a Cockney child. The live-action adaptation actually does make this a little better, though, because they reveal all those side characters were surprise celebrity cameos, so at least you get to be like, oh shit, that was Ewan McGregor the entire time? In a different version of this story, maybe it would be interesting to extend the ending and explore what it's like when the person you fell in love with dramatically changes into someone they're more comfortable being, and is even maybe more your type, but is also unfamiliar to you. And yeah, that's a lot to ask from a Disney cartoon. I'm just using this as a soft example of how easy it is for there to be some minor thematic dissonance between the plot and the experience of your story, even if the narrative logic is completely sound. Let's look at a different example that everybody is equally deeply familiar with. The movie Penelope from 2006. The one about the girl with the pig nose? We all know it by heart, but I'll recap anyway. Penelope is the first girl born into a wealthy family after they were cursed by that same judgy witch. The conditions are that their next daughter would be a hideous monster until she's accepted by someone of her own kind. Upon seeing the nightmare child they produced, the family fakes her death and hides her away. Her mother then orchestrates a love is blind type scenario to introduce her to other high-class suitors and get them to fall in love with her before they see her, hoping that will be enough to make them accept her as one of their own kind and break the curse. But it never works out, because no matter how enamored these upstanding gentlemen may be with her voice, personality, or intelligence, they scream and run away the second they lay eyes upon her gross, horrible face. The movie actually has a great romance with James McAvoy, but that's more of a B-plot to the main story of self-acceptance. Penelope eventually escapes and reveals herself to the world, where she is instantly accepted and adored by the general public. Spoilers incoming, but like, watch it anyway. By the end, she learns that maybe she's not an impossibly ugly monster, and that there are other people who will not only tolerate her differences, but specifically love her for them. There's still some freaks who are so bothered by it that they'll stop at nothing to ruin her life, but once she realizes they're the ones in the wrong, she comes to love herself just the way she is, which then, ironically, breaks the curse.
I like myself the way I am.
Turns out, the legalese of witch curses is sometimes intentionally vague, and one of your own kind did not exclusively refer to a fairy tale romance. It's honestly a really solid look at shallow beauty standards permeating what should be unconditional love between mother and daughter, and the revelation that her mom could have just ended the curse right away by accepting her daughter the way she was is painful. I love it. Even though, similar to Beauty and the Beast, by the time the curse lifts, you're kind of left thinking, oh, I kind of liked that pig nose though. But the reason it's different is because the movie is aware of this disconnect, and it actually integrates that somewhat into the story.
It's not going to grow back.
What makes you think
I miss it too.
It doesn't provide an answer exactly, but it does recognize the problem, and that dissatisfaction just becomes part of the ending. It's a very small critique, and it certainly does not ruin the movie, and it could be argued that it's better that there is no clean resolution to this.
What do you think it means?
Rich people suck!
Unrelated to anything, Penelope might also have my favorite Peter Dinklage role. He plays this reporter with an eye patch who's been haunted by the elusive story of this monster girl for 2 decades and is super not taken seriously by anyone for it. And he has some of my favorite comedy moments, like, ever.
Hey, don't! Hey!
Hopefully I'm making it clear how a little bit of thematic dissonance can exist without ruining your story. If you're like me and prone to overthinking, it's easy to notice holes like the ones I've described in your own writing and get really dejected. You might suddenly feel like you need to scrap your whole screenplay and go back to arranging sticky notes on the wall, but Penelope got finished and is great in spite of or even including its thematic imperfections. Beauty and the Beast is a literal classic and has been remade dozens of times. Art doesn't actually have to be perfect just to exist. In fact, it tends to stick in our memories better when it's not, and if you actually buffed out all those imperfections, you might lose what made it so great in the first place. Am I saying this while avoiding working on my own anniversary specials because I've gotten in way over my head and put too much weight on making sure they're perfect? Of course I am. I'm a massive hypocrite. But I'm hoping that by saying this, I might help you avoid a similar fate. We still get the point of these movies. We enjoy the journey and the characters, even when the bow on top isn't tied just right. And sometimes, it's best to just finish up what you're working on and look back on it later with fresh eyes. Otherwise, you'll never finish anything, or learn how to do it better. That said, a bunch of other people have finished things already, so let's try to learn from their experience, because I still have 2 more examples, and the algorithm dictates that this video should only be about halfway done. The objectively best version of The Ugly Curse has got to be what is also the most culturally significant work of art to come out of the early 21st century.
Somebody once told me the world is gonna roll me.
Shrek took a very easy route for comedy, subverting expectations, family-friendly gross-out humor, extremely time-sensitive pop culture references. And yet from this came one of the best stories we've ever had about self-acceptance, body positivity, and the Ugly Curse actually rewarding characters for their personal growth, and us for our investment in the story. The premise is already a subversion of the masculine hero trope. Shrek is a fat, bald, green ogre who smells bad and hates everybody, and he gets sent on a quest normally reserved for Prince Charming. If it were made today, it would definitely be heavily D&D influenced, but the fantasy genre was just entering mainstream popularity at the time, and so it has a very unique flavor because it draws entirely from classic fairy tales. The story is Beauty and the Beast adjacent, about a princess falling in love with a monster, or at least someone who's treated like a monster. In a vacuum, he's more like a 40-year-old Scottish bachelor with a skin condition. But she looks past that because they have a lot in common. Her own preferences and behaviors fall outside the norm for a damsel in distress, and like him, there's more to her than what's on the surface. And then we get the double twist, which is that she's the one with the ugly curse, and it can only be broken by getting someone to fall in love with her. She assumes that means kiss a prince, stop turning into an ogre, even though the contract clearly states find true love's first kiss and then take love's true form. You really gotta read between the lines. I'm telling you, those witches are smart and bored, sometimes capitalists. But where this story really stands out is that this time, breaking the curse means embracing those parts of herself she was trying to hide. And so she stays permanently in her monster form with the person who saw through the skinny white horse girl facade and loved what was underneath. This pays off in a way the other 2 movies don't, because here, the resolution actually addresses the themes we've been building up, and it doesn't give us whiplash when Fiona changes because we've already been prepped for it. We've been warming up to Shrek the whole movie, and Fiona's true self is strongly hinted at multiple times, so by the time we see her as an ogre, it almost makes more sense than what we're used to. The moral doesn't feel like it gets lost in the ending, and we're rewarded for following along, while the characters are rewarded with self-acceptance and the acceptance of each other and their new community. And then we have a whole sequel that continues to address and tie up loose ends on this same theme, having characters take time to look back on their decisions, to question whether things would be the same if their roles were reversed, or if they're actually happy with this new set of circumstances that's so completely opposite of what they had originally planned, and then to actually get answers to those questions. It's just incredibly rare to see a story continue from one film to another this effectively, and it's only possible because the entire world, cast, and plot are all built on top of one central theme. And this is what I've been orbiting around as I complain about Arcane and The Last of Us, and probably a bunch of other stuff. Both of those shows misunderstand the themes they started with to such a comical degree that they may as well have subverted them intentionally. And pointing that out felt important because it seemed like so many people didn't notice, which honestly, I kinda get. It's almost like looking at a mirror image of your best friend and trying to figure out what's wrong. Like, you can tell something's off, but eventually your brain's just gonna go, you're probably just seeing things. But since it's not useful writing advice to say, just be the opposite of a bootlicking armchair philosopher who talks talks like a rapist. Let's go over a lab-controlled example of how I would personally go about creating something narratively on par with the illustrious Shrek. We'll start with the theme, obviously. That's the whole point. Write it down in the middle of your paper. You have paper in this scenario. I find that themes usually work best as a question or a conflict, and ideally something that you don't personally have a definite answer to. If it's something you're interested in figuring out for yourself, that provides extra emotional motivation for you to keep exploring it, and productivity is all just a big trick you play on your own brain. Let's call our theme internal versus external beauty. We're gonna write a story about judging books by their covers, whether the inside or outside counts more, what it looks like to really accept yourself and others. You can phrase it however feels right, but keep it concise. This is not a story by itself, but anything we add needs to relate back to this theme. Next, we'll start brainstorming characters based off that theme. No personalities yet, and no details about their physical appearance unless it happens to directly relate to the theme, which in this case it actually does. Instead, we're gonna start listing every possible belief a person could have on this theme, because characters make their decisions based on their beliefs, and those decisions are what drives a story. So for this story, we could have a character who sees themselves as ugly and owns it, and they shun the approval of others. We can have one who is conventionally attractive, and that's how they value themselves, and they're terrified of ever being perceived as unattractive and losing that value. We could have someone who's completely blind to external appearances, just looks right past them and sees straight through to people's souls. Or somebody who only values people and things that appear beautiful to them, with no awareness of how they might be perceived in return. Once you have as many opinions as you can imagine, you can pick out the ones that sound most interesting to you, and then you can start imagining how those characters might interact with each other, how they'd butt heads when placed in situations that challenge them on those specific beliefs. They can hold other beliefs too, but those don't matter, because the goal for this story is to challenge these beliefs. Those interactions are going to become our scenes. Let's say character 1, who actively pushes people away to avoid rejection, runs into character 2, who couldn't care less what they look like and immediately decides character 1 is awesome. That's an entire relationship dynamic right away, and the theme would be inherently reflected in their interactions. But then you press the issue. You have character 1 try to scare away character 2 by being as unpleasant as possible, and character 2 goes out of their way to follow character 1 around and invade their space. So now it's a contest to see who's gonna crack first while the main plot unfolds. A plot which will spur on by giving character 4 power, which they will then use to try and collect all the beautiful things for themselves and deport anyone they don't like to a place they don't belong. Draw from real life examples, if you can think of any. Make that place character 1's house so that it directly interferes with their belief that everyone needs to stay the fuck away from them. So there's conflict. To resolve the conflict, characters 1 and 4 can make an agreement. Character 1 gets to remain comfortably detached as long as he retrieves a specific beautiful thing that character 4 wants. It's a win-win with another win because character 2 is also going along for the ride, just happy to be there and ignoring the inevitable sudden stop to this relationship when character 1 gets what they want. The beautiful prize in question can then be character 3, who is desperate for any acceptance they can get while not holding others to the same standard, creating immediate grounds for a friendship between 2 and 3, and a rocky relationship that can grow between 3 and 1, depending on how willing character 1 is to let their guard down and believe that someone can like them. Only after you've started mapping out all these potential character dynamics is it then time to choose a main character. This story could be told from any of these perspectives, and some of them might work better than others or just appeal more to you. In this example, character 1 has the most complicated relationships with every other character and a clear path for personal growth. And also, this has already been done and he's Shrek, so he's the protagonist. We can also start mapping out a satisfying ending before we've even decided who these people specifically are, because whatever the details may be, we can say character 1's resolution is to accept friendships even at the risk of being hurt, and character 3 needs to learn to value themselves far more than the subjective beauty they can offer to others. So then by the time you've determined that this is a story about an ogre falling in love with a princess cursed to also turn into an ogre, it's kind of obvious that the story has to end with her staying an ogre. Now obviously I'm cheating here because I'm working backwards from a finished functioning example, but this map is something I've drawn out for my own stories many times, and it helps prevent you from reaching that point somewhere down the road where you go, wait, why am I telling it like this? This is all so much easier to mold and shift before you start solidifying characters with multiple unrelated beliefs and personalities and desires. When you're eventually writing out dialogue between two very different people, you'll be able to take a step back and see that it's all still supporting this central theme because that's what you built first. All that said, in practice, you're probably not starting with a theme. You most likely have an idea for a character or a world or a plot that you like and you want to tell a story about that. that. And that's okay. You just need to work backwards for a second and pick a central theme that applies to the things you already like and is interesting to you, and then get okay with letting go of some details if they don't fit that theme you picked. Now that we know how to seed a theme into every little detail of your story, let's take a look at one more example of the ugly curse done perfectly, which also happens to be one of my favorite movies that I love talking about, Turning Red.
May I remind you what real men look like?
Yeah, but tickets to Four Town are like $1 bajillion, and Devin's right here.
And free!
Turning Red is about choosing whether or not to accept the parts of yourself that you're told are not acceptable. And true to the technique we've just covered, every character has their own very strong beliefs around that theme. And since several of the characters established are relatives, it also becomes a story about the generational trauma that comes from repressing those parts and then demanding your child do the same. And the movie uses its version of the ugly curse to illustrate all of that because it's incredible. This is what I mean when I say you can tell the filmmakers were invested in what they were making. If you're working with a theme that you're personally invested in, it's so much easier to be honest and include your own random thoughts and experiences that you might feel are unique to only you. But then I watch your movie, and even though I was never a Chinese Canadian girl in a Toronto public middle school, I get it. In this movie, the curse is not from a witch trying to make some guy be less of an asshole, but actually is a power passed down generationally from woman to woman in this one family. It was once this crazy ability to turn into a giant red panda and fight off marauders, but now that they live in urban North America in 2002,
What was a blessing became an inconvenience.
Mei Lin, the main character, already has some pretty normal problems to begin with. If we're recreating our theme chart and self-acceptance versus self-control is at the center, she's the one currently torn between these two choices. And we see this very literally as she acts very proper and careful around her parents, but wild and free around her friends. Meanwhile, her mother believes fully in the value of self-restraint and is the one encouraging Mei Lin to do the same. Get good grades, pick the right friends, honor your family, profit. Her dad is also there.
Right, Chit? See, your father agrees.
Her friends represent the opposite philosophy because they're middle schoolers. They encourage her to explore, to goof off, to indulge, and they worry about her missing out on valuable experiences. Then we throw the curse into the mix, which specifically triggers any time she loses her composure. So like a more direct version of Fiona in Shrek, the panda becomes a visual representation of Mei Lin's two sides. We see her literally hiding it from her parents while her mother treats it like a disease and is dead set on getting rid of it, but then sharing it openly with her friends who of course absolutely love it. And then, just to make it extra spicy, the ritual her family wants her to perform to banish the panda spirit or whatever overlaps with a perfectly 2000s boy band concert she desperately wants to go to. We've all been there. And that's more than enough for a decent movie, but because we know our theme, we can easily take it a step deeper. On top of everything else, we also see how her mom went through these same things herself.
It's your mother.
I'm not here.
And now we know what the ending of the story looks like when she chooses the path of self-restraint. But Mei Lin is a different person with different influences, and she doesn't want to give up the unrefined, honest parts of herself. So when she's pushed to her limits in the final moments of the ritual and finally has to make a decision, she chooses to keep her panda. And then the climax is the consequences of her choice, which are big and messy and dramatic, just like she is. She goes to the concert, makes up with her friends, and then she anime fights her mom to a mashup of boy band music and ritual chanting, and we get a clear visual comparison of everybody's personal trauma.
I told you she was big!
By the end of the movie, Mei Lin does what none of the other protagonists in this video were allowed to do. She keeps and integrates both sides of herself, embracing the unexpected new person that she's become, and refusing to change for anyone who won't do the same. And she's rewarded with friends and family who accept her for all of it. And we as the audience are rewarded for investing in every part of her story. We don't lose the panda form, or the red hair, or the friends, or the mother just because she's learned her lesson and it's time to reset now. She doesn't have to go back to normal. The reward is that we're able to reframe all of these things in a positive new light. And that's all because the filmmakers here knew exactly what they wanted to say. It didn't have to be about middle schoolers and mid-2000s Toronto, or boy bands, or Asian Canadian family dynamics, but they use elements of things they clearly know and care about from their own lives to carry that central theme. The reason The Ugly Curse is so perfect for explaining this topic is that these stories themselves aren't afraid to be messy. They don't always stick the landing or make every metaphor airtight, and that's what makes them feel alive. You don't want to be thinking about how every loose end connects to another one, or digging around finding meaning from meaningless coincidences in your own writing. Ironically, the only people who do that are the people who think they're geniuses and make podcasts complimenting how tight their own writing is. Most of us who make things, or want to, are chasing a feeling we once had when someone else's art cracked something open inside us. And when we try to do that same thing ourselves, we get this impossible idea that our work has to measure up to what we remember, or else we've failed. But the truth is, the stuff that moved you probably wasn't perfect. It had weird edits, or awkward pacing, or a subplot that went nowhere. You just didn't care, because at its core, it wasn't trying to put on a show, it was just being honest. And your work can be that for someone else. Not because you nail every beat, but because you say something only you could say, in your voice, shaped by your own instincts, limits, and unfinished thoughts. So if you're stuck on a project, and you can't say the theme of your story out loud right now, try this method. It's a good way to shake yourself loose and start looking at your writing in a more personal way. And don't be so hard on yourself for getting stuck. Just let that part be a little bad and come back to it later. Or don't. It doesn't matter. It's gonna be fine. It's gonna be fine. I gotta make these videos before Halloween, man.